Hi everyone, it's Mumtahana and Sorry back with another read along. Today's book is titled Who Stole Kathy Young, and it is young adult fiction. The ISBN number is 0 396 07888 5, and it is copywritten 1980. But I do know there must have been some other version of this story written, because when I initially found out about this book, I was a little girl in elementary school, and my mom actually bought it for me through the school's weekly reader club. I guess it either was or it's like the scholastic book clubs that they have when they send like the little like maybe 4-page list of books that you can buy for your kiddies. And so my mom got this for me, and I recall her telling me that when she was a little girl, the story was called Who Stole Young Kathy. So I'm assuming it's the same exact story, just with some little tweaks, but I don't know. Nonetheless, this one is copywritten in 1980, and I will say this is probably my most favorite book from my childhood, and probably the reason why I love mysteries and crime shows and stuff as much as I do now. So I'm going to just read the inner flap just to give a little summary of what it's about, and then I will proceed to read the first 4 chapters of the story and here on YouTube, and then the rest of the book will be on my Patreon account. So, Who Stole Kathy Young by Margaret Joff Clark. Meg and Kathy often watched the tourists who came to vacation at the Gulf Coast town of Oak Point, Texas. 2 of them, the girls thought, were following them. So when Meg saw Kathy pulled, struggling into a curtained van, she suspected the 2 strangers. While the sheriff of Oak Point searched for the kidnapped girl and Kathy's father waited for the ransom note, Meg worried, especially because her friend was deaf. Enlisting the aid of Julian, an older boy who worked on the shrimp boats, Meg started a search of her own. She looked not only for Kathy, but for Kathy's dog, Rusty. The Chesapeake Bay Retriever had last been seen running after the van. Kathy, meanwhile, was trying to escape. She almost made it, but when she finally saw the face of the mysterious boss of the kidnapping ring, she knew that she was marked for death. Margaret Joff Clark is the author of Barney and the UFO, Mystery in the Flooded Museum, Mystery of Sebastian Island, Death at Their Heels, and Mystery Horse. I've heard of none of those books. All right, so here we go. And these will be pages 1 through 38. Chapter 1. 2 Girls, the Staring Stranger. Rusty growled low in his throat. Startled, Meg Carberry looked across the rough stretch of sand and saw again the dreaded figure of the man perched on the low wall that separated the Young's lawn from the beach. He was wearing shorts that displayed his bony legs and, as always, a cap with a long pointed visor. When he stood up, so tall and thin, Meg's heart gave a panicky leap. He was looking directly at her. Then, deliberately, the man climbed back over the wall and strolled away across the grass. The big Chesapeake Bay Retriever, 1 year old and full of spirit, tugged on his leash. A ridge of rust-colored hair bristled on his spine. Meg held him back. "This way," she urged, pulling him toward the road. Although she had a reputation for being fearless, not for anything would she go closer to that man. It was a perfect early June morning. Already the Texas sun was hot on the sand, and the bay was bright blue with white fringed waves. It was the first day of summer vacation and the beginning of a 2-week visit with her best friend, Kathy Young. Kathy had been asleep in the other bed when Meg, awakened by Rusty's barking, slipped out to exercise her friend's dog. When she hurried up the curving drive toward the house, the dog was still making short muttering growls and glancing back towards the tall man who was now sauntering north on Shore Road. It was only when Kathy, with her long black hair flying, ran down the drive toward them that the dog changed his growls to exciting yips of pleasure. Meg let go of his leash and he bounded forward. He was friendly to almost everyone, and he always obeyed Mr. Young, but Kathy was the center of his world. Meg went on past them toward the house. On the front terrace, Mrs. Prentice was setting the table for breakfast, her indignant voice greeting Meg as she came up the steps. "So, you're the one who made that dog bark this morning. Don't you realize some people need their sleep?" Meg was surprised, even though she was aware of the housekeeper's crusty disposition. Before she had a chance to explain that Rusty had awakened her, too, Kathy called out behind her, "Hi, Meg, where'd you go?" "You were gone when I woke up." Meg whirled around and said with a smile, "Your dog took me for a walk." Mrs. Prentice vanished into the house, taking an unwilling Rusty with her. Of course, Kathy wasn't aware of the woman's remark because she couldn't hear well enough to catch a conversation if the speaker's back were toward her. She wore a hearing aid, but still she needed to pick up some words by reading lips. It was no use making Kathy unhappy by telling her what had been said. The housekeeper brought out the electric coffee pot and plugged it in. "An extra person to feed, and then we have to eat out here," she complained, keeping her voice just low enough so Kathy couldn't understand her. Meg flushed, and her gray eyes showed the hurt she was determined to hide. She stood up even straighter than usual and kept her gaze on Pedro, the Mexican gardener, who was under the largest live oak tree, raking up the few fallen leaves, shiny and oval like dehydrated minnows. Just then, Kathy's father came out of the house. "Morning, everyone." He strolled over and put his arm around Meg's thin shoulders. "And a special good morning to my second daughter. Seems real fine to have you around." Meg leaned her head against him for a brief moment, all the anger draining away. This tall, dark-haired Texan with his understanding brown eyes was one of her favorite people. She knew Daniel E. Young was an important man in the nearby village of Oak Point and in all of eastern Texas, but to her he was simply a friend, a grown-up friend with whom she felt completely comfortable. Now that her employer was there, the housekeeper's personality changed like a chameleon. "Just a day for eating outside," she said with a put-on smile. Mr. Young pulled out a chair for the woman, and she sat down and unfolded her napkin. Meg wondered if Kathy's father would treat her like one of the family if he could see the real Mrs. Prentice that lurked behind her smile. She had come here only a month ago when Mrs. Anderson, the former housekeeper, had gone to live with her son. Mrs. Anderson was wonderful, thought Meg. She had taken over care of the house soon after Kathy's mother died a year and a half ago, and she had been like a kind grandmother to Kathy. From where she sat, Meg had a view of the bay. No wonder the house was named Bayview. Looking past Kathy's dark head, she could see the white triangles of two sailboats far out from the shore. A little nearer, a shrimp boat poked along, dragging for the brown shrimp that were caught in the small bays behind the offshore islands edging the Gulf Coast. Suddenly, Meg stiffened, every nerve in her body alert. The stranger was back, only now he was standing boldly at the foot of the driveway staring at the group on the terrace. "Kathy!" she exclaimed, pointing toward the man. "There he is again. And he was on the seawall when I was out this morning, too." Kathy turned around and took a quick look. "You're right, that's Heron, but I don't see Toad." Mr. Young touched Kathy's hand. "Heron?" he asked. "We just call him that," explained Kathy. Look at him, Dad. Doesn't he look like a heron? The man had turned sideways, gazing up the road. In profile, he was even more bird-like. He has the legs for it. And yes, that pointed visor looks like a beak, Mr. Young grinned. You two, you have a gift for names. Kathy looked puzzled, so Meg repeated what Dan Young had said, using a combination of sign language and finger spelling. Do you know him? Kathy's father asked. And who is Toad? This time Kathy understood. Toad's a woman who is with him a lot of the time. We don't know either of them. We just see them walking around, she said lightly. Giving them names, that was just for fun. You know, our people game. Meg was ready to explode. What was the matter with Kathy? Sure, watching Heron and Toad had started out as a game, but it had become positively scary. She opened her mouth to tell Kathy's father how the two people who had shown up every day last week when she and Kathy walked to and from school, and once had followed them all the way to the door of junior high. But Kathy put her finger to her lips, signaling for quiet. Mr. Young's eyes were still on the man who was now standing on the long pier that reached into the bay. If he and his friend are hanging around, I better find out who they are. They're tourists, said Mrs. Prentice in her abrupt way. They stay up the road at the Starfish Cabins. My daughter Essie met them at a fish supper at the community hall. Oh, is that so? Mr. Young looked less worried. Meg could guess why Kathy didn't want her to say anything about Heron and Toad that would upset her father. But why was Mrs. Prentice trying to make them sound so innocent? Meg was convinced they weren't ordinary tourists. At this distance, she couldn't make out Heron's face, but the memory of his intense stare made her shudder. With difficulty, she kept silent, and no more was said about the man. Mr. Young left for his office in the city of Brighton, 30 miles to the south, and after helping Mrs. Prentice clear the table, the two girls ran upstairs to Kathy's room, which they were sharing. Last Friday, school had closed for summer vacation, and on Sunday, Meg's parents had gone on a 2-week trip to Switzerland, leaving their daughter at Bayview with Kathy and her father. Kathy shut the door on the hall, then leaned against it, laughing. One more word and you'd have had Dad calling the police. Maybe he should, Meg pronounced each word carefully, as she had learned to do when talking with her friend. Kathy shook her head. I don't like the way Heron and Toad are always staring at us, but they could be a couple of tourists with nothing to do. Whoever they are, I don't want to worry Dad. You know, ever since we lost Mom and I got sick, he's always afraid something will happen to me. Meg dropped onto the twin bed where she had slept the night before. All too clearly she remembered how, 2 months after Mrs. Young's death, Kathy had had a serious illness that took away most of her hearing. Mr. Young, reeling under all of these blows, had walked around like a man in a daze. As for Kathy, for a while she had lost interest in everything. Her dark eyes had had a haunted expression. That was when Meg invented the game of looking at people, making up names for them, as well as stories about their lives. The imagining had helped Kathy to come through her own deep trouble. All right, Meg agreed. We won't tell your father. I wish I talked to Mom and Dad before they went away, but Heron and Toad didn't seem so important last week. Yeah, Kathy said slowly. I'd feel better too if we could tell someone about them. I wonder what Julian would say, mused Meg. That's it. Let's tell him. Kathy jumped up and started to make her bed. Kathy's back was turned, so Meg reached over and touched her arm to get her attention. He'll be on the shrimp boat all morning, she reminded her friend. Let's go to the wharf right after lunch. Thinking about Julian, already she felt less worried. Chapter 2. Two girls. A visit to Julian. Meg and Kathy had met Julian Benito one Saturday the past January when they were walking along the Oak Point Village Wharf about a mile from Bayview. January was closed season for bay shrimping, so several boats were moored there. The two girls had been drawing near to one of the smaller ship boats, the Small Fry, when a sassy voice called out, "Where are you dolls going?" Meg's face had felt warm. She wasn't accustomed to being called a doll. Kathy, with her expressive face and splendid dark hair, was the one who usually got the attention. Whoever was talking must be looking only at her. Meg, who was thin and erect as a fence post and had straight light brown hair and gray eyes, often felt invisible when she was with Kathy. But she didn't mind. Being center stage wasn't important to her. "She even blushes," said the male voice. He had noticed her too, thought Meg. Kathy, of course, hadn't heard the boy, so she hadn't blushed, and if she had, it wouldn't show much because of her olive skin. Meg faced Kathy and said, "Someone's giving us a line." Now they were opposite the Small Fry, and Meg could see the boy sitting cross-legged on the deck, painting the inside of the low rail. He had black hair and looked Spanish, like Kathy, and his dark eyes were friendly. Meg recognized him at once as a student she had seen at basketball games, but since he was in high school, she wouldn't expect him to pay any attention to two girls from junior high. Yet here he was, smiling at them. "This is a boring job," he said, speaking slowly. "Stick around and talk to me." "Why?" demanded Kathy pertly. "Maybe we have something better to do." But they had stayed and had gotten well acquainted with the talkative Julian. They found out that after school and on Saturday he helped his parents with their shrimp business. Whenever he could, he went out shrimping with his father. His mother sold their catch in a tiny store next to the dock. "Besides, I get a little spending money gathering news for the radio station." He rubbed his thumb and finger together in an expressive gesture. "You know, school news, sports, anything I can find out." He was ambitious, that was for sure. One memorable day, he and his father had taken the two girls fishing. They left the dock before sunrise and stayed out 3 hours. Dressed in their oldest dungarees and pullovers, they had even helped to cull the trash fish dragged in by the net along with the shrimp. When Meg and Kathy rode into the wharf on their bicycles that hot June afternoon, the little shrimp boat was in and Julian was aboard, repairing a net. "We have a problem for you," said Meg. "Great. Just what I need, another problem. We hooked onto something on the bottom of the bay and ripped a big hole in our net and lost half our catch. Now what's your problem?" Julian made a sweeping motion of welcome toward the freshly scrubbed deck. "Come aboard." Meg and Kathy took turns telling about Heron and his chubby girlfriend, Toad. "So we're afraid they're up to something, especially Heron," finished Meg. "What do you think we ought to do?" Julian answered promptly, taking care to face Kathy so she could read his lips. "Nothing. You could get into hot water yourselves and make trouble for some innocent people if you go spreading ideas about them." Meg was disappointed. Julian didn't seem to understand. "You're the only one we've told," she said, "except we just mentioned them to Kathy's father and Mrs. Prentice." "Sure, and Mrs. Prentice will tell her mousy daughter Essie, and Essie works in the sheriff's office. Next thing, the police will be checking up on your stories." Meg sputtered. "This isn't a story. You ought to see Heron and that woman. Then you know what we mean." Julian shrugged. "If you don't like these people looking at you, stay away from them." "It isn't that easy," began Meg. "Look," Kathy interrupted. "There she is now." "Who?" asked Julian. "Toad," said Meg excitedly. She's coming this way. Kathy, you and I ought to turn our backs to her, but Julian, you get a good look. We'll keep on talking and pretend we don't know she's around. Julian was a born actor. Meg, watching his face, noted how his eyes, half hidden by his thick lashes, followed the approaching woman while he appeared to be giving all his attention to the torn net. As soon as Toad had gone past, he grinned at the girls. Well, asked Meg. Just a roly-poly little woman, he said. But then he added more seriously, she did seem to look us over rather thoroughly. You see, Meg said triumphantly. It's nothing to get excited about. She was just admiring me, he teased. Meg was crestfallen. It wasn't like Julian to laugh at the confidences she and Kathy shared with him. She had hoped he'd give them some sensible advice. Today he made her sharply aware that this fall he would be a lordly senior and that he was at least 3 years older than she. As they pedaled back along Shore Road toward Bayview, Kathy said, I guess we're getting too old for this kid stuff about spies and bank robbers. Meg gave her a quick, amazed look, then stared down at the twirling wheel of her bicycle to sort out her thoughts. Apparently, she was the only one who sensed danger. Was it because she wanted to protect Kathy? That she felt responsible for her? No, it was more than that. She had a deep-down distrust of Herman and Toad. How'd you like to run into Herman on a dark street? She asked. I wouldn't. But I'm not going on any dark streets, at least not alone. Me either. Let's stick together. Meg left it at that, but she didn't feel satisfied. If Kathy's father knew the two strangers were shadowing them, she was sure he would be concerned. Chapter 3. Two Girls. Kidnapped. The 1.5 mile ride home from the town of Oak Point seemed endless. Even the breeze from the bay, tossing their hair and singing in the bicycle wheels, carried little relief from the steamy heat. When they reached the house, Meg collapsed onto her bed. I'm going to die, she complained. Kathy sat down beside her, twisting her heavy hair into a knot on top of her head. I know. Let's go swimming. She expertly thrust the hairpin into the black knob. Meg groaned. I forgot my bathing suit, and I can't bear to go clear home after it. We went right past my house and I never thought of it. What a dope I am. Yeah, Kathy agreed, smiling at her. You can use one of my suits. It won't fit, objected Meg. I'm taller than you and skinnier. She motioned as she spoke. So what? Demanded Kathy. She tossed a 2-piece yellow suit at her friend. I'll give you some safety pins. As she and Kathy walked toward the backyard, Meg was self-consciously aware of the lumpy tucks in her bra and pants. I hope no one sees me like this. No one will, Kathy assured her. And it did seem unlikely she'd be seen behind the high oleander hedge that sheltered the pool on 3 sides. The soothing coolness of the water made her forget everything but how wonderful it felt. She floated blissfully, reveling in the knowledge that this was fresh water and her hair wouldn't be sticky afterward. She had a fleeting wish for a pool at home, then reminded herself that it didn't really matter. She could always use Kathy's. If it weren't for Mrs. Prentice, she would feel as much at home at the Young House as she did in her own home 1/2 mile down the road. She and Kathy had been friends ever since kindergarten. When Kathy had lost her hearing, Mr. Young hired a special teacher for the deaf. Meg remembered the first day she had met Miss Flora Ryan. The teacher had been trying without much success to interest Kathy in sign language. But soon after Meg arrived, the two girls were laughing and making signs to each other. That night, Mr. Young had come down to the Carberry house to ask Meg's parents if she could stay with him and Kathy for a while and study with Flora Ryan. For 6 happy months, Meg and Kathy had lived and worked together. After dinner that night, Kathy and Meg cleared the table and stacked the dishes in the dishwasher. Mrs. Prentice had a date to go to the movies. She was a widow, and 2 or 3 times a week, went out with a man she referred to only as my friend. He always pulled up to the front terrace in an ancient green two-door and sat there waiting, smoking or combing his thick pepper and salt hair. Sometimes he tooted the horn, but he never got out of the car or rang the doorbell. As soon as the dishes were in the dishwasher, Kathy headed for the television to watch a program, an interview with an artist. Meg roamed around the living room. She wasn't interested in the interview. Kathy was the one who wanted to be an artist. As for herself, she wanted to be like Flora Ryan and teach deaf children. Mr. Young was across the room reading the newspaper. One hand absent-mindedly caressed Rusty's head. The dog's eyes followed Meg as she wandered around the big room. Soon he scrambled to his feet and, coming across to her, rubbed his head against her legs. "Right," said Meg. "We need a walk." She sat down on the davenport beside Kathy and caught her attention. "I'm going home after my bathing suit," she said. Tomorrow Kathy's father was taking the two girls to a nearby island for a swim and lunch. She wouldn't be caught dead wearing a pinned-on suit in public. Mr. Young looked up from his paper. "Want a ride?" "No, thanks though. Rusty and I like to prowl along the shore." She snapped on the dog's leash, then touched Kathy on the shoulder and waved goodbye. Kathy lifted one hand. "Bye, y'all come back." This was one of their private jokes. Every store clerk used the same expression. As soon as she was outside, Meg let out the rope she had fastened to the end of the leash. Rusty, exuberant, raced down the circular drive and, with some urging, turned south on Shore Road. The sun was now in the west, and they were cooled by the long shadows cast by the live oak trees on the landward side of the road. Rusty's riotous approach sent small, quick-legged birds scurrying across the sand. The herons and white egrets that stalked the shallow water paid little attention to him. Meg checked to see if the tall stranger with the baseball cap were in sight, but the shore and road were deserted except for a van far ahead, parked on the hard-packed sand. A man was in the water, casting for fish. People frequently went wade fishing along here. For the past week or so, it seemed someone was always tossing out a line. Only one house stood in the half-mile stretch of road between Young's and Carberry's. That was an ancient landmark called the Ogden House. Meg walked past slowly, studying it while Rusty pulled on his leash. She was fascinated by the gloomy-looking mansion with the tower topped by a widow's walk. Once it had been a beautiful place, and people had paid to go through it. Although for years it had stood empty, it still drew the curious and the mischievous like a magnet. Meg and Kathy had prowled through the house one afternoon a month ago and had come away sickened at the way vandals had smashed the plaster cupids that decorated the archways and had written their names on the white walls. Meg was almost past the house when she saw an old blue panel truck pull into the rear driveway. She paused and watched a tall young man with red hair and beard get out of the truck and go toward the house carrying what looked like a toolbox. She had heard a rumor that someone had bought the house and was going to fix it up. It must be true. The man opened the back door and went inside. Just past the Ogden house was the fisherman's van she had noticed when she started out, a brown one such as many people use for traveling. The window in the second door on the side facing her was curtained with brown and yellow material, but beyond that, the rear wall of the van was solid. The fisherman was still in the water nearby, faded dungarees rolled up to his knees. His back was toward Meg, but she could see that he had shoulder-length brown hair. Rusty would have splashed out to greet him if Meg had not held him back. "Any luck?" she called. The man didn't turn around, but he answered something that sounded like not even a bite. The Carberry house had a close-up, lonely look. Meg tied the dog to the porch railing, then ran inside. She scurried around, watering the plants, then went upstairs for her bathing suit. In her room, she lingered at the window overlooking the bay, feeling a little homesick. This house was closer to the road than Bayview and was located on a slight rise, giving a long view of the water and of the shore to the north and south. She watched idly while the lone fisherman, almost a quarter of a mile up the road, walked into the beach and climbed into the van. Meg tucked her bathing suit into a plastic bag and ran downstairs. Outside, she untied Rusty and started back toward Young's. The part of Shore Road that lay between the Young and Carberry houses was almost straight, so Meg could see a figure, far ahead and dwarfed by distance, walking toward her on the shore side of the road. Even at that distance, she was sure she recognized Kathy's vigorous stride. Her friend must have decided to come to meet her. Meg began to hurry, trying to pace herself so they'd meet at the halfway point, a large live oak near the Ogden house. Now she could see Kathy's long hair blowing back in the wind, but the coral of her shirt was still graying by distance. The fisherman's van was heading north, but moving so slowly it was only a short distance from the old house. Rusty pulled toward the beach, and Meg let him tow her across the road. She could see Kathy better on this side anyway. The van was approaching Kathy, but she was striding along with her head turned toward the bay. The taillights of the vehicle blinked on. It must be stopping. Meg stared earnestly ahead, trying to see more clearly. She walked faster, although her chest hurt already from her rapid pace. It was automatic for her to keep track of Kathy. I'm like Kathy's father, she thought. Both of us think she can't get along without us. Now she was sure the van was standing still. A shaggy head poked out the window on the side toward the bay. That must be the fisherman. Probably he had slid across the seat to ask Kathy a question. Meg saw her friend turn her head and then step closer to the van. Probably she couldn't hear what the driver was saying and was trying to read his lips. He must be a tourist asking for directions. Rusty whimpered and pulled forward. Meg bent and unsnapped the leash from his collar, saying, "Go see Kathy." But the command was unnecessary. Already the dog was racing up the road, reaching out with his gangly young legs. Meg kept her eyes on the van, far ahead. The door behind the driver opened slightly, and Kathy stepped back as if to talk to someone in the rear seat. Why would she have to give directions to a passenger in the back? Next, to Meg's surprise, the driver got out and pulled the rear door open wider. He stood directly behind Kathy. Meg felt a prickle run up the back of her neck, a forewarning of danger. Something was wrong. The whole thing was like a tense moment in a TV movie when the sound went dead. She wasn't close enough to hear a single word. Wondering if this was what it was like to be deaf, Meg began to run toward the van. She thought she heard Rusty's bark. He had already covered more than half the distance. Suddenly, the scene ahead changed dramatically. Kathy turned her head toward the driver and began to back away. At that, the man gave her a strong push toward the open door. Meg screamed, but there was no sign that she was heard. Even while she ran as fast as she could go, she kept her eyes on her friend. Kathy was trying to pull away, but she didn't have a chance. Rusty, still traveling toward her, wasn't close enough to help. To Meg's horror, she saw Kathy disappear into the van. The sound of the door slamming shut came back as a faint thud, muffled by the cries of the gulls and the wind in the saltgrass. The van leaped forward and sped away as if it were drag racing. Within seconds, the road ahead was empty except for the dog, running steadily in the direction taken by the van. Chapter 4. Kathy. the hooded man. As soon as the TV interview with the artist was over, Kathy started down the road to meet Meg. It was a warm night and the breeze from the bay felt good. It lifted her hair, cooling the back of her neck where her black mane was heaviest. Kathy loved wind. It was so alive it made her feel like running and becoming a part of it. She wished she could make great leaps the way ballet dancers did. The sun, though hidden from her by the trees on her right, still shone on the bay. A trick of the light made the troughs of the waves royal blue while the tops were green. It would be interesting to paint the same scene at several different times of day. There were so many pictures she wanted to make. She was going to be an artist, at least she hoped so. Her art teacher at school said she was good. She thought wistfully about the summer art workshops she had been invited to attend. It really would be great to live for a month in a dormitory with other art students her age and take classes in sketching and painting and design. It was the chance of a lifetime, but she just couldn't go, not without Meg. The college where the workshop was to be held was in Brighton, 30 miles south of Oak Point. Her father's office was in that city, so she could see him now and then. But no one she knew would be at the school. No one there would know sign language or finger spelling. What if she didn't understand the teacher? Who would explain it to her? And how would the other students feel about a person who was deaf? Kathy felt uneasy at the idea of being on her own. Dad said the workshop was a big opportunity, but he wouldn't tell her what to do. He said it was her decision. Dad tried so hard to be a father and a mother, and he was great, the best dad ever. But Kathy often thought how wonderful it would be to have a woman in the house she could talk to. Mrs. Prentice was no help that way. In fact, Kathy liked the nights when the housekeeper went out. Even though Mrs. Prentice usually went to her room when she had cleaned up the kitchen after dinner, her unsmiling presence seemed to darken the entire house. She wasn't like their former housekeeper, Mrs. Anderson, or Flora Ryan, the teacher who had helped her to cope after she became deaf. Dear Flora, she had been so much fun, playing Scrabble with them all in the evening, sitting around the fire on cool winter evenings, toasting marshmallows and talking. Mrs. Anderson had often joined them, and they had been like a real family. All too soon, Flora had said that Kathy could manage without her, that she knew sign language and finger spelling and could read lips fairly well. All Kathy needed now was practice, and she could do that with Meg. As for Mr. Young, the two girls could help him improve his ability to talk with his hands and to practice enunciating more clearly so it would be easier to read his lips. Flora was getting married. She had kept her fiancé waiting until she was sure Kathy was ready to be on her own. In a short time, she was far away in North Dakota. Kathy had missed her, but even so, it hadn't been too bad until Mrs. Anderson left. Right away, Mrs. Prentice applied for the job, and Dad had decided to hire her on a trial basis. Neither he nor Kathy was happy with her, but Dad hadn't yet found anyone to take her place. Kathy was so deep in thought she was startled when she looked to her right and saw that a car had stopped close behind her. It was a dark brown van. The driver had slid over to the passenger side and was leaning out the window. His lips were moving, but though Kathy could hear a mumble, with the wind and the gulls' cries, she couldn't understand what he was saying. She moved closer to the van. "What do you want?" Again he spoke, and this time she was able to catch the word Galveston. He must want to go there. "Keep going north about half a mile, then turn left," she began. The man lifted his hand and interrupted her. He pointed to the back seat. "Talk to my friend back there. He's the navigator." This time Kathy was able to read his words. But why should she explain to someone else? Couldn't the driver remember a few simple directions? A yellow and brown striped curtain covered the tightly closed second window. She wondered how she was supposed to communicate with the person back there out of sight. Then she noticed that the back door was ajar. Obediently, she moved to talk through the opening. It was dark inside the van, and she could see only a dim figure on the seat. Go straight ahead, she began again. The car door opened wider, and Kathy looked back to see who had moved it. To her surprise, the driver stood behind her with one hand still on the door. She didn't like his closeness. There was no reason for him to get out of the car. She became aware of the emptiness on the road. There was only one way to escape, and that was back and to her right. Her quick leap in that direction was too late. The driver reached out and shoved her toward the open door. As she staggered off balance, a strong arm shot out from the back seat and seized her wrist. Kathy screamed and fought with all of her strength, but the grip was like iron. The man behind her put his hands on either side of her waist and lifted her into the back seat. As she tumbled forward, she had a glimpse of a dark hood with two round holes through which a pair of eyes shone wickedly. Again Kathy screamed. A hand covered her mouth, smothering her cries. At the same time, she felt the stab of a needle in her right hip. The door slammed shut, the driver slid into the front seat, and then the van took off with a bound. At first, Kathy struggled to break free, but soon she felt drowsy and nothing seemed to matter. It reminded her of the time when she had had her tonsils removed. Her mind began to play tricks on her, and she imagined she was again in the operating room. The hooded man was a doctor. He's going to be surprised, she thought fuzzily, when he finds out I haven't any tonsils. Seconds later, she lost the last shred of consciousness. It's getting good. Stay tuned.